Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take that stack of sources. You've got articles, research, maybe your own notes, and really pull out the essential nuggets.
Right.
The goal is simple. Give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed, maybe spark some surprising insights, those aha moments,
Without getting buried in the details.
Exactly.
Ooh.
All without feeling overwhelmed. Today, we're zooming in on just one day, but wow, what a day. August 21st, 2025.
It really was packed.
Yeah, not just headlines, but a real snapshot of a world constantly shifting. Geopolitics, science, it's all there. Okay, let's unpack this.
And what's fascinating looking at your sources for that day is how you can see the connections, right? Between things that seem totally separate at first glance.
That's the plan, finding those threads.
We'll look at what happened, sure, but also why it matters and maybe what bigger patterns August 21st really brought into focus.
Absolutely. So let's start on that global stage. August 21st definitely brought some stark reminders about, well, conflict and diplomacy.
It certainly did. Your sources point to a pretty significant and frankly troubling development in the Russia-Ukraine war.
The air barrage.
Yes, one of the largest that year, targeting Western Ukraine. And this was an area that had been, comparatively sheltered until then.
Right.
And the key thing, among the targets was an American-owned electronics factory. That felt different.
Yeah, that wasn't just another strike.
Yeah.
That's where it gets really interesting if you're trying to figure out the long game. Targeting an American-owned facility in a safer zone. What does that signal?
Well, it definitely underscores the vulnerability, the growing vulnerability of Ukraine's entire industrial base. Basically, nowhere is truly safe. And it makes finding any kind of off-ramp from the conflict incredibly complicated. Your sources show that back in Washington, U.S. and allied defense chiefs were actually working on military options for Ukraine.
So an acknowledgement things weren't stable.
Precisely. And at the same time, you had this intensifying debate in Europe about a post-war stabilization force, significantly one without U.S. troops.
Which points to what?
It points to a pretty grim expectation, honestly. A long, costly conflict where Europe might have to step up and take a much bigger, more direct role in security.
Okay. And then shifting over to the Middle East, the Israel-Gaza conflict, also a complex picture on August 21st. Military action, diplomatic moves.
Very much so. You had Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements that day laying out what looked like a dual strategy.
Right, giving the final okay for the Gaza City takeover, calling it a culmination.
Exactly, framing it as the endpoint of operations. But then, in the same breath, pledging to restart negotiations with Hamas, a 60-day ceasefire, phased exchanges.
Pursuing both at once seems challenging. What's the toughest part of that, do you think?
Well, the tension there is just huge. And it raises an important question. Is it even feasible? Your sources are highlighting the mounting international criticism over civilian casualties.
Yeah, I saw mentions of internal Israeli data from earlier showing a high civilian death rate.
Right. And then you have humanitarian agencies warning about acute starvation risks. Plus, Western governments are really dialing up the pressure on settlement policy.
They see it undermining the two-state solution.
Fundamentally undermining it. So even if military goals are met, the diplomatic and humanitarian costs are just spiraling. It makes that idea of a culmination look, well, deeply problematic to much of the world.
And speaking of pressure, the UK made a move, summoning Israel's ambassador on the 21st over a new settlement project. That's more than just a quiet chat, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a very clear diplomatic signal. The UK didn't mince words. They called it a flagrant violation of international law.
Strong language.
Very. And it signals, I think, a growing willingness, especially in Europe, to use tougher diplomatic tools, maybe visa bans, economic measures down the line when settlement policy just directly clashes with the stated goals for peace. It shows they're taking the practical impact much more seriously now.
Okay, let's bring it stateside.
Yeah.
August 21st was also a massive day for the U.S. political and legal landscape. Lots of shifts, some real standoffs, headlines galore.
No kidding. One of the absolute biggest developments, legally speaking, was that win for Donald Trump.
The New York fraud case.
Yes, that divided appeals panel tossing out the, over $500 million civil fraud penalty against him. That's huge, and not just for him.
So beyond the immediate win for Trump, what does that ruling really mean? Does it ripple outwards?
It definitely weakens a key part of New York's civil strategy, and it might limit how state attorneys general approach these kinds of big, expansive fraud cases in the future.
Interesting.
And one thing your sources note is how markets and donors are probably reading this. They likely see it as strengthening Trump's political position, right? Even though other parts of the case are still being fought over.
Right. The perception matters.
It always does. Legal outcomes for public figures, they always echo through politics and finance.
Okay, then shifting gears to federal funding. The Supreme Court. A tight 5-4 decision allowing the Trump administration to move forward with cuts to NIH grants.
Yes, specifically those tied to research on racial and LGBT health disparities.
That sounds like something with immediate real-world consequences.
Oh, absolutely. The legal fight over the cuts isn't over. The majority kind of hinted the disputes belong in the Court of Federal Claims, but the impact on the ground, it's severe and it's now.
Like what?
We're talking major disruption for labs, immediate hiring freezes, real risks to clinical studies, public health research, stuff that's time-sensitive and already running. The administration calls it an ideological course correction, but advocates, they're warning urgently these cuts will just widen health inequities, set back vital research for years.
Okay, and adding to that domestic picture, Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
the expansion of that multi-agency crime crackdown,
Yeah.
very visible, right, with National Guard troops coming in.
Yeah, about 2,000 Guard members from allied states deployed in the Capitol. It really brought a federal presence right onto D.C. streets.
Yeah. And the reaction.
Completely polarized, as you'd expect. And as your notes show, you have supporters saying it's needed for safety to fight crime.
But others.
But D.C. officials, civil liberties groups, they're raising serious alarms. Worries about overreach, chilling effects on protests, or just daily life.
Right.
And deploying the Guard like this, which often answers to governors or the president, it just pours fuel on that whole D.C. statehood debate, you know?
Yeah.
And the arguments over where local policing ends and federal authority begins, it's like a small picture of a much bigger national argument.
Got it. And quickly, 2 other U.S. policy notes from the 21st. A judge stopping work at that controversial Alligator Alcatraz migrant detention center.
Yes, halting new construction and detainee transfers there in the Everglades. And on the same day, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced an immediate pause on worker visas for commercial truck drivers, cited immigration issues, security threats.
And the reaction to that?
Immediate backlash. Transportation groups warning about messing up supply chains. It just shows how even a targeted policy tweak can send ripples through the economy almost instantly.
Okay, let's pivot then. The economy, tech. August 21st gave us some really mixed signals there. Kind of confusing, actually.
It really was a mixed bag. On one side, your sources show U.S. business activity picking up steam. That S&P Global Flash Composite PMI, a key indicator, rose nicely to 55.4.
And manufacturing looked better, too.
Yeah, manufacturing actually jumped back into expansion territory. That's good news, right? Strong growth signal.
There's always a but.
But yeah, Wall Street dropped. For the 5th day straight, the S&P 500 fell, partly because Walmart's profit missed expectations, and you had other companies talking about cost driven up by tariffs.
So what does this contradiction tell us? If you're trying to gauge the economy's health, what's the takeaway?
It suggests the market is really wrestling with 2 things, right? You've got solid underlying growth, but also this pressure from higher prices, inputs, and outputs.
And shaky earnings reports.
Exactly. And all that keeps the Federal Reserve's next move really uncertain. Investors are trying to figure out, will this tariff-related inflation slow down any potential rate cuts? It's that classic push-pull between decent fundamentals and those inflation worries.
And adding another layer, jobless claims jumped pretty significantly on August 21st. Most in about 3 months.
Yeah, and continuing claims hit a near 4-year high.
So that's another signal for the Fed, too.
Absolutely. It reinforces that trend of the labor market cooling off, which, again, complicates things for the Fed if people are calling for quick rate cuts.
Right.
So this raises an important question then for Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He's got his Jackson Hole speech coming up, that big annual meeting. How does he walk that line?
You mean signaling future easing without spooking markets about inflation?
Right, or looking like he's giving into political pressure, especially with those recent administration attacks on Fed Governor Lisa Cook. It's a real tightrope walk for the Fed right now.
Okay. Shifting to tech, we saw some adjustments there, too. Meta putting a freeze on many AI hires. That felt notable.
It did. Citing cost discipline, regulatory pressure, it feels like maybe a pause in that initial frantic AI gold rush.
What do you think it signals more broadly?
I think it hints at a wider shift in big tech, moving away from just grow at all costs in AI towards having to actually prove the return on these massive investments.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it suggests maybe a more regulated, more budget-conscious phase for AI development is setting in, especially with new rules coming online in the EU and the US. That initial explosion is maybe settling into something more strategic.
But on the flip side, news out of China. A startup, DeepSeek, releasing an upgraded AI model designed specifically to run on their domestic chips.
Now that is really significant. It shows China's AI sector actively adapting to those export controls and chip shortages everyone talks about.
How so?
By building models optimized for the hardware they can get, they're reducing their reliance on foreign tech. And it probably intensifies competition, especially in open source AI and those mid-sized models. It's a clear push for self-sufficiency against trade headwinds.
Interesting. And maybe one potential positive sign in U.S.-China relations, those reports about Boeing negotiating a huge aircraft sale to China, up to 500 planes.
Yeah, that surfaced on the 21st. If that deal actually goes through, it could certainly signal a bit of a thaw in economic tensions, and it would be a massive boost for Boeing's recovery, obviously. But experts are cautious. Any deal like that is still tangled up in all the ongoing diplomatic friction and strategic calculations both sides are making. It's a potential opening, but there are a lot of political factors still in play.
Okay, let's move to our final segment, the environment's fury and science's promise. Both were really front and center in your sources for August 21st.
Yeah, it was a day that really hit home on the climate front. Several powerful examples. Hurricane Erin was still way out at sea, but it still caused hazardous surf, localized flooding all the way from the Carolinas up to New England.
Right, forcing beach closures, even delaying a NASA rocket launch from Virginia.
Exactly.
It's a good reminder that even the indirect impacts can be really costly and disruptive, can't they?
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here is how that connects to other climate events happening globally on the same day.
Like in Portugal.
Yeah, Portugal's brutal wildfire season was intensifying. A fire in Valverde seriously injured a firefighter. Hundreds of thousands of hectares already scorched that season. Just devastating.
And Pakistan.
Pakistan dealing with horrific monsoon floods. Over 700 dead by that point. Thousands displaced since June. Just unprecedented rainfall, they were calling it. Constant calls for climate adaptation funding.
And even here in the U.S., the Northeast dealing with severe drought. Water restrictions, impacts on farms.
Yeah, the common thread, and your sources really emphasize this, is that these aren't just random events anymore. They're increasingly seen as part of these climate change-driven abnormal weather patterns.
Putting huge pressure on governments everywhere.
Exactly. Pressure for better management, better preparedness. It's moved beyond isolated incidents to a global pattern that demands real action.
Okay, slightly different kind of earth-shaking event, that big earthquake. Magnitude 7.5 off the coast of Argentina in the Drake Passage.
Right, very remote area. The tsunami threat faded pretty quickly, thankfully, and no damage reported.
So just a geological event.
Well, scientists pointed out it was still an important data point. Helps them understand the really complex tectonics down there, around the Scotia and Antarctic plates. Reinforces why rapid detection matters, even far from populations. Gives us clues about how our planet works.
Okay, and finally, let's end this deep dive on a more forward-looking note. August 21st also saw some really exciting news in health and science.
Definitely. Your sources mention scientists revealing new ways to measure DNA damage. That holds real promise for improving cancer therapy, making it more targeted.
And AI in healthcare popped up too.
Yeah, lots of headlines around AI-driven interventions. Plus, that landmark study about cuisine, that micronutrient linked to memory and brain function.
Right, sparking big investments in dementia care tech.
Yeah, the potential impact is obviously profound. We're talking about the promise of more personalized medicine, more effective treatments, hopefully with fewer side effects.
That sounds amazing.
It is. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, these amazing innovations also bring up those crucial debates, don't they? Patient privacy, data security, how we regulate all this.
And who gets access?
Exactly. Accessibility for everyone, especially disadvantaged groups, in this new age of digital medicine. The scientific promise is huge, but so are the ethical hurdles and the practical challenges of rolling it out fairly.
Okay, we've really unpacked a lot today. It's quite something how one single day, August 21st, 2025, really did feel like a microcosm of everything going on. Geopolitics, economics, the environment, science.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a day that just underscores how interconnected everything is and how fast things are moving both globally and right here at home.
Yeah.
It really highlights why digging into the sources, looking for those deeper connections like we did today is just so essential. You can't just take the headlines at face value.
Absolutely. So as you, our listener, reflect on these stories, these patterns, maybe consider this. In a world where everything feels linked, where one crisis seems to bleed into the next, where do you see the most significant leverage points for positive change? And maybe, what's the single biggest factor you think is shaping the global story right now? Something to chew on. Until our next deep dive, keep exploring.